human scenes of death.
At the dawning of the 20th century, France was a world power. And with that power, they spread their faith. And with that faith being Catholicism, in North America at least, they were up against England and the Church of England. And part of spreading that word with two priests, Jean-Baptiste Revere and Guillaume Leroux, Roman Catholic missionaries spreading the word. And the word of God, well, it was big business. And whomever could get to the godless heathen first and convert them, well, it was the gift that would keep on giving. It was in the 17th century that French missionaries started making contact in Southeast Asia, eventually taking over, with it becoming Indochina in 1858. And by all accounts, it was a gold mine, with high taxes put on rice, opium, and other products. It made up for over 40% of France's revenue. But the goofy little bastards didn't go along with it easily, and there were pockets of resistance that the French dealt with harshly. Well, I guess you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. And now they were looking to expand their interest to other parts of the world. And the word of God was just another way for them to get their filthy French foot in the door. The two missionaries had heard through God's grapevine that their Anglican counterparts were expanding and moving into Arctic Canada, preaching to the godless savages. And they told their cardinal they better get in there lickety-split and start telling their side of the story. And although they knew nothing about the region, the customs, even the language, the cardinal begrudgingly granted the two priests permission. Given a rifle each, wearing only thick sweaters, the two missionaries hopped on the next banana boat for a journey that would take 86 days through treacherous conditions, with many saying they were flying in the face of God. The ancestors of the modern Eskimo are thought to have migrated from Central Asia just after the Ice Age, bringing with them dogs, sleds, large boats, and hunting equipment and tools, and building shelter out of snow and ice, using traditional tools to make clothing and weapons, a way of life that has remained unchanged for over 1,000 years. People so tuned into their environment that's literally in their DNA. I guess it's safe to say that if you ran a truck over an Eskimo, fish guts would shoot out of every hole. One of my great regrets in life was never learning to drive. The Arctic region stretches coast to coast over 3,000 miles, from western Alaska to eastern Greenland, spanning 3 territories and 9 time zones, reaching halfway across the world. A foreboding landscape with the most inhospitable conditions in the world, with the only constant across all of it being the cold, with temperatures reaching -90, and with the polar vortex racing around the poles, there is a constant raging wind that never subsides. And yet it's been home to the Eskimos for over 1,000 years, doing a whole bunch of Eskimo shit, and by the looks of it, probably loving it. Although whatever this guy's doing is making me feel uncomfortable. And by recorded history, in 1913, the majority of them had never seen a white man. But that was all about to change. when the two missionaries arrived at the copper mine settlement. As they turned the bend, what they saw made them lose their shit and pray to their god. A waterfall that appeared to be bleeding sheer blood. Discovered 2 years earlier. And sure, they'd heard rumors. But witnessing it, well, it was horrifying. Like staring into God's vagina. But the two missionaries weren't the only ones that were taken back. Because when they stepped out of that canoe, the Eskimos stared at them like they just stepped out of a spaceship with their dicks in their hands. And it was clear to the two missionaries that the tribe had never laid their eyes on white men before. "Hey, how's it going there, Chief? How are you?" And God's dynamic duo figured that that wasn't such a bad thing. After all, it would be convenient to keep the savages in line, and a healthy bit of fear meant that they wouldn't get any trouble or backchat. And once they were able to put the fear of God into them, well, they'd be eaten out of the palm of their hand. Jean-Baptiste Revere and Guillaume Leroux, although on the same mission, were of completely different personalities. Leroux was quick-tempered and was often known to talk down to his subjects like they were lesser than himself, while Father Revere had a reputation for being kind-hearted and of gentle nature and truly believed that by bringing God to their subjects, it would improve their lives, and took offense when his fellow priests would call the Eskimos ice gooks in relation to their Asian ancestors, now stuck there staring at each other, with neither party understanding the other. But almost upon arrival, the two priests would fall foul of their hosts. Leroux, spotting a herd of antelope, thought he'd impress his hosts and get dinner in. So he pulled out his rifle and he shot one of them, but only wounding the creature and wanting to save bullets. He walked up and he bashed its face in with his rifle butt, but far from impressing the Eskimos, they were horrified at the sight. Well, not this guy, but the rest of them. Because Eskimos believed that the other creatures meant life. And just like other predators, they had to live in the balance with their prey, or it compromised their own lives. If they hunted when they didn't need the hunt, and not in their hunting cycle, they were willing to starve and even die until the balance of life returned. The priest killed the antelope in an undignified way, and the gods would now punish them, and the antelope would stop offering themselves, and the tribe would now have to go hungry. But Father Revere seemed unfazed by this slip of etiquette and upsetting the Eskimos, and went about business to set up camp for the night. That night, after the Eskimos had helped the two priests set up camp, Father Revere wrote a letter to his family about the incident, saying that although he loved Father Leroux like a brother, he believed that his fellow missionary had caused great damage in the relationship that they wanted to establish with the Eskimos. And although the tribe had helped them set up camp and offered them supplies, Revere still felt that there was something not right. And this uneasy feeling, he felt he not dare speak to Father Leroux about, as he was his senior. Trying to make things right, Revere hired two men from the tribe to be their guides. Sinisik and Olsuk were looked up to for their skilled hunting and could possibly warn the priests of any future indiscretions. But instead of making things better, it only made things worse. Paying the two in pelts, Father Leroux would give the two jobs that they seemed hesitant to undertake, causing Leroux to have fits of anger. I guess he wanted his pelts worth, but it was later found out that these jobs were considered demeaning to the Eskimo males. One such chore was to chew on the hide of the priest's seal boot to make it more comfortable to wear, a job usually reserved to the wife of the boot wearer. Not understanding the priest's words, all they saw was his anger. Revere wrote that there was visible fear on their guides' faces. Yeah, probably a fear of getting ass fucked. Day 3 wouldn't be any better, with Father Leroux storming into the priest's igloo, saying that he believed that one of the Eskimos had stolen his scarf, and that he figured they needed to round the tribe up for an interrogation. With later accounts of this differing, and some saying it was a rifle that had gone missing. Enclosed in the letter that he had been writing a family member, Revere thought that interrogating the Eskimos was a ridiculous idea, because the Eskimos didn't understand English, and the priest didn't understand Eskimo. He figured they should just keep their heads down, because in the next few days they would be moving on to Fort Norman and never see the tribe again. Easy peasy, just squeezy. There were conflicting reports on the events that were to occur next. But the most credible version was told by the tribe's elder, who told police that just after dinner time, the two guides that the priest had hired walked into the priest's enclosure, and while LaRue was sitting down and writing a letter, Alsac, with an axe that he'd most likely taken from the priest's canoe, raised it above his head, and with one thrust, he removed the temperamental priest's arm. When the priest, now minus an arm, turned around, Alsac hacked off his other arm.
Not again.
It was then that LaRue ran outside screaming for Revere to take flight because the savage had turned. Revere, probably knowing that his friend couldn't be saved, took flight. The two hired guides tripped up the armless LaRue as he ran, then cut his throat from ear to ear. His last words were gurgled by his own blood, but the Eskimos figured he was reciting the Lord's Prayer. As the village gathered and looked on, and although Revere got a good head start as they cut up his friend, the trackers knew which way he was going. The nearest outpost was nearly 5 miles away in the direction of Blood Falls. And if the priest ran fast enough and didn't freeze to death, he just might make it. But that day, God wasn't on his side, and the two men that he had hired found him cowering at the foot of Blood Falls. And as he begged in a language that they did not understand, they stabbed him multiple times, cut his throat, and then put a bullet in his head with his own rifle as his blood flowed into the Blood Falls. After Sinisik and Ulsuk had executed Father Revere, they brought his body back to the village, and then he and his best friend were gutted like seals, Catholic seals, and their intestines were pulled out and eaten and shared amongst the village. And although the fish-breathed fuckers would later testify that it was part of their religious beliefs, I personally think it was because they'd never eaten French before. Me, I don't like French food. It gives me diarrhea. But word travels, and although it may take a little longer, the Antarctic ain't different from anywhere else. And at some of the outposts, words reached them from passing by trackers of an Eskimo walking around in a priest's costume, reciting the Lord's Prayer. And I guess this story became so popular that it reached back to the snail eaters in Paris, France. Being that it had almost been 3 years since I last received a report back from LaRue and Revere, the church figured they best contact the police and figure out what happened to their God Squad. When the Canadian Mounted Police arrived at the Eskimo village, this time with an interpreter, sure enough, there was an honest-to-goodness Eskimo, and he was dressed like a priest. And he even had his own congregation, an Eskimo congregation. The two men instantly admitted to the killings, and they figured they had to kill LaRue because LaRue was going to kill them. And all because they wouldn't suck on his boot. And as for Revere, they didn't want to kill him because he was their friend. But they'd heard from passing Eskimos that if you kill one white man, many will return and kill as many Eskimos as they can get in their rifle sights. So they figured it were better to be safe than sorry. At first, the jury acquitted the two men, saying that they believed the Eskimos were terrified and feared for their life and did it in self-defense. But the judge was so enraged that these savages got away with it he made them go to trial again, and this time they were found guilty and sentenced to hang. But it was the Roman Catholic Church that came forward and begged for leniency, with both men later released in 1922. It's interesting to note that after the Blood Falls murders, the Catholic Church stopped sending missionaries to that part of town, which is probably best.
Legion forever!